Home education is a growing phenomenon in society, and research shows that home learners perform generally as well or better than children in schools. But a lot of people cannot understand how that is possible for parents to educate their children as well as teachers do it in school without teachers' qualification. To answer that question, we decided to talk to a teacher that understands the school system and can compare it with the homeschool system. So we're talking to Nicky Wesson, who is a qualified teacher and that will answer these questions. So Nicky, give us an overview of your background as a teacher.
Okay, well, I studied teaching at Mowbray Teachers Training College, so I have a 4-year teaching qualification. I then went on to work at a private school in the area where I taught in the foundation phase. I was a grade 1 teacher there for 6 years, and I was also head of department in my last year.
You were a teacher at a private school, and you then decided to take your children, or not to send your children to that school, although it was a good school. So what was the reasons why you decided to homeschool your children?
Okay, well, I was not pro homeschooling when I was a teacher. In fact, I had a friend who homeschooled her 2 children, and when I was still teaching, and I often frowned upon the way she did things because, you know, it wasn't being done the way I knew it should be done at school. But then when I had my own child, and my views changed quite a bit once I realized I'm responsible for this little life, and I'm responsible for the decisions that I make, or you know, what I choose to allow him to do or not allow him to do. Yeah, and I think also just because I was a teacher, and especially because I taught grade 1, I know how strong the influence the school has over a child. For instance, I often had parents coming to tell me, you know, last night we were trying to help little Johnny do this, but they said, no, it's not what Mrs. Wesson says, and what Mrs. Wesson says is law. And they would often come and tell me, you know, comments like that, which made me realize what a strong influence a teacher has over a young child. And I also read once that when you choose to send your children to school, the primary influence shifts from the parents to the school environment and to the teacher, and we didn't want that for our children. One of the other reasons is that also when your kids go to school, you have no control over what they're exposed to and what they're not exposed to. You drop them off in the morning, and what happens there that day, you don't have any control over. And we've just felt, especially as Christian parents, that we wanted to be more in control of when our children learn certain things and how they learn certain things. Yeah, I had many instances where things came up in a class because one child in the class knew something that they shouldn't have known, and it affected everyone within the class, because little children also don't really know how not to talk about something that maybe they've been exposed to. They naturally talk about it. So things come out that maybe you wouldn't really want your children knowing. I also think that it's very important that when children you want them to know sort of maybe the more sensitive things, you have the control over how you bring it across to them, because that's really, there's a strong influence there if they're exposed to things in a way that isn't a kosher way, or yeah.
So even if it's a school with which you agree with the ethos of the school, it can still happen that things are taught that you wouldn't like your child to be taught.
Absolutely. You know, just because you might send your child to a school that's got a very good ethos and it's Christian based even, it doesn't mean that all the children who are in the class come from homes with a Christian background, or you know, even a sort of a good solid family, not at all. And you know, I have a friend she'd sent her child to school, and by the time he was in grade 2, he'd already been exposed to all sorts of terrible things, and it was just because he was in a class where there were children who'd been exposed to things, and so he found out about all of those things: rape, drugs, abuse, and it had just come from the friends that he'd been with. Yeah, and I mean, that's, by the age of 8 already. Also, I also experienced that all children learn differently, and so not everybody conforms to the system, the school system. And I remember teaching children who there was nothing academically wrong or anything, they just weren't emotionally ready to be in such a formal environment. They wanted to just be running around in the field playing, but now they've been forced to sit in a desk all day and learn. And I think the beauty of homeschooling is that you can deal with your child in a way that better suits them and who they are as a learner. Another reason is that you can develop your child in their own talents, abilities, and interests, which is not something that happens in the school system. They decide, for this year you are learning this, and whether you're interested in it or not, or whether you are sort of ready to do that work or not, that's what you get given, and that's what you get assessed on. Whereas we as homeschoolers now see that there's a whole nother way of dealing with your child. If they suddenly become interested in bees because the next door neighbor has a beehive, we can go off and learn all about bees, and you can go and get books on bees and read up about bees, because that's become an interest to that child now. Whereas
he will remember that because he's interested in
it. Yes. The other thing is that I think with school, the focus is mainly on academics. Are the children up to standard with maths? Are they doing enough? Are they reading well enough for their age? Whereas at home, we focus on those things, but we can also focus on other things like character development. And we have the time to spend with our children when things come up, or behavior issues or whatever. We can address it, we can sit down with them. When the children are away from home for a large chunk of the day, and then they're coming home and they've got extramurals and they've got homework, you don't really have that time to spend with their children, which is a great benefit that we as homeschoolers have, because we can address issues as they come up, we can deal with things as they arise, and we can focus on character development as well as academics. Academics is important, but it's not the be all and end all of life. There are many important things. The other thing that makes me sad about when I hear friends of ours, for instance, with their kids at school, is that the amount of pressure that's on children today. They're little, but they're running from one thing to the next, and then they've got so much homework that they're not coping. And I hear about moms who have to employ au pairs in the afternoon to help out with homework because they can't cope, and they need people to run around to get project stuff and whatever, because there's so much pressure on. And then even just like on the weekends, they can't come out with you on the weekend because there's too much homework, the child's got this and this for Monday. And then you think, but my goodness, the child's only 8 or 9 years old, there's also life that needs to happen, but for me, my kids are happy, they're at home, they're relaxed. When it's winter and it's freezing cold, we can sleep in a bit in the mornings. We just don't have that hectic rat race pressure on us. And I think, when you hear of young children who are on antidepressants already at the age of 8 or 9 because they're not coping, you think is this what it should all be about? Yeah, the other thing that I wanted to say was homeschool curriculums have not been designed for teachers. They've been designed for parents who want to teach their children. So you don't need a qualification to be able to follow the curriculums that are out there for homeschooling. For instance, one of the maths curriculums that a lot of homeschoolers choose to use comes with a professor who teaches the lesson on DVD, and then there's a manual for the mom to follow, And I know for a fact that a lot of moms who maybe weren't so good at maths when they were at school are now enjoying the fact that they're learning maths alongside their children. And another thing is if we're not sure about something, we can go to the internet and you can research it and you can find out together with your children. And then you are not only finding out that information for them, but you're also showing them how they can look for information that they might need in the future. So you're teaching them skills on how to find out what they're wanting to know.
Well, on top of that, when you can say that parents can purchase programs or have access to the best teachers in the world, and they can pause those teachers and they can rewind it and they can play them over and over again, which is impossible in a school setting where you get what you get and they've got to go through their schedule.
Yes, I think just on what you're saying now, the beauty is at a school, if you have a lesson for the day and today you are learning some trigonometry lesson and you don't get it, there's no going back. You can't come back tomorrow and say, oh, I need that lesson again. You've now lost it. You've got to go and catch that up on your own. Whereas in homeschooling, we can watch that same maths lesson 10 times if that's what the child needs until that concept is grasped. And we also don't have a time pressure on us where you have to know this by the end of the week. If it takes 2 weeks to learn a week's lesson, that's okay. Because again, the next time they'll get something quicker and they'll go through it faster. So we can again tailor make it to our child's needs.
A researcher that sort of also looked at this question was the psychologist called Neumann, a Canadian psychologist, and he found that the most critical success factor for education is the bond between child and teacher. And obviously, a homeschooling parent has got a big advantage there. Is that what you experience as well?
Yes, I could comment on that because I think it is very important that you bond with the children in your class and that they bond with you. But as we all know, certain people bond better with someone and maybe you don't have such a connection with another person. So I can say that when I taught in a class, you didn't necessarily always bond in the same way. You maybe did with some kids and other kids not. That's just because of personalities and because of just the way people are. Whereas with in a parent-child relationship, you have a natural loving relationship. So I think that it's much easier for you to have that special connection. And even like most of us would know, you have different connections even with your own different children because there's different personalities, so you bond in different ways. So I think that you can, again, I will say, you have a much better advantage of connecting on a special level with your children. Yeah.
Okay. When you move from the school environment to home education, so you were taught how to educate in a school. Were there a lot of things that you had to unlearn when you started home educating?
There was one thing that specifically stands out for me, and that is when you're in a school, in the school system, there's very much in this age group, this is what you learn, then you move on to the next age group and you must acquire these skills. Whereas now that I'm at home with my children, I've realized that's not actually the case. We don't have to put pressure on a child to do something by a certain age. All of us are different. We all learn differently. Even as adults, when you learn a new skill, one adult might learn it quicker than another adult. And something for me that has stood out is I've chosen to do things quite differently with my children, and I have one son and one daughter, and even with them, one has taken longer to learn to read because he didn't have an interest in it initially, and the other one has learned to read much earlier on. And that's okay. It's not going to matter one day when we are adults if you learn to read at 6 and I learn to read at 7. It's not going to count, for anything. It's the same as I mean, technically, we homeschool from the time our children are born. And if you think about it, babies don't do everything at the same age. One baby might learn to walk at 9 months, and another baby might only learn to walk at 15 months, and that's okay, because we're all different. And it's the same with the way we learn in the academic, in that phase. Yeah, I just think that, I have been allowed, like I say, my kids a little bit more freedom, and I haven't put pressure on them to learn something by a specific age, and that was one of the biggest things, because at school you always kind of think, oh, what grade are you in? Oh, so you learning to read already, like it becomes it's a very set sort of standards that you have to uphold to. And you get assessed on those standards, and then if you can't do something by a certain age, your report reflects that. Whereas maybe if they did exactly the same assessment 6 months down the line, now you can do it, but now it's too late, because now you've got a whole new set of things that you should be doing.
And now you're ready to fail on the next thing.
Yes, yeah. So yes, that was probably one of the biggest things for me. And even like I say, I still have a lot of teacher friends. And when they come around and they see that I'm choosing to do things differently, some of them get quite nervous, because they're like, oh, but shouldn't he be doing this now? Because that's how we've been trained to think, whereas, and I've been quite, no, he'll get it when he's ready. But you're stepping and you're going against the grain, because it's not the norm that we've all been sort of taught this is how it should be done. Yeah.
Home educators make use of a variety or a diversity of not only curriculums. So a curriculum is a thing that chops up knowledge into subjects and grades, and then you progress through the curriculum, but also educational approaches that are totally different, like unit studies, classical education, Montessori. Have you, in your studies, have you been exposed to these other approaches?
No, not really. They might have touched on them, for instance, given you a definition, Montessori is a bit of this and whatever, but not really. Actually, in my experience, you actually, if for instance you want to learn the Montessori approach, then you have to go to a specific institution to learn how to do Montessori teaching, for instance. But then there's Waldorf, and there's, like you say, there's many other approaches. So I think in terms of the homeschoolers, again, I've realized that there's a lot of different approaches, and there are people who use many different systems and things. And like I say, even sometimes in a family, you'll choose to do maths this way with this child, and you'll actually choose a completely different approach to teaching maths with another child based on them and their learning styles and their abilities. So it just opens the scope up so much more.
So, in summary, I think you believe that it's possible for a parent without a teacher's qualification to teach their children.
Yes, I do. I believe that all our children belong to God, and that God gave each family the children that they were meant to have. And I believe that the primary responsibility of how we choose to do things with our children was placed on the parents. And I also know Marty Duplessis always uses the phrase, the parent is the best curriculum for their child. And that's because you as a parent, you know your child better than anybody else. Especially when we homeschool, our children are with us 24/7. So you really know them very, very well, and you know them better than any other person knows them. So you can really get to their heart and to their just to their needs the best. Yeah.
Well, Nicky, thank you very much. I think this is very helpful.